In looking for a meaningful way to do an art project with my students about the Holocaust, I started thinking about all those piles of shoes of concentration camp victims and survivors that you see. And I first looked back to see what children's shoes looked like in the 1930s when Hitler first rose to power. So I researched imagery of children's shoes and then men's shoes and ladies' shoes. And I started to think about how my students could take shoes and transform them to show the personalities of the Holocaust victims. Those shoes just look so anonymous in those piles, and I was wondering if there was a way to take them and give them individuality and show what that person's life might have been like if it had been left unaffected by the war, or if they'd been allowed to grow up. And I started thinking about artists during the war and how Hitler had hated modern art and how he closed the Bauhaus school. And I started to look at the different artists that he targeted during that time, and I picked Joseph Albers, who fled Nazi Germany in 1933, the same year Hitler rose to power. And I thought about what would Joseph Albers' shoes look like if he'd been allowed to stay and the Bauhaus had remained open. I took a pair of shoes and I old pair of men's shoes, and I gessoed them, and I painted them like one of Joseph Albers' paintings. But I thought about, I'm not going to be able to get hundreds and hundreds of pairs of old shoes for my students to use. So I went to a podiatrist and I got a lesson from a foot doctor on how to make shoes out of Paris craft. You just take plaster bandages. I'm going to show my students.
Just get my good side.
After you make the shoes, you can add tinfoil or clay and then Paris craft over that in order to add sculptural shapes or add a high heel or add faces or animals or anything else you want to them. So what did you do? You got it under the water, you wet it, and you just brought it over here.
Warm water.
Warm water?
Yeah, because if you use cold water, it'll take a lot longer to dry.
Ah, okay. And you just wrapped it around her foot and smoothed it out.
Supposed to be like so uncomfortable, useful.
And that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Let me know when you're ready to pop the other one off and I'll turn the video on again.
That's so weird.
So you do it right as
Why
it
is it
starts
so
to
dainty?
harden,
Okay.
but you would do it right as it starts to harden, but when it's not.
Yeah, because you want to capture the arch right here. So you don't want it when this is too soft.
Mhm.
And then you're going to lose that hole.
But if you wait too long, it'll be hard as rock and it won't pop off, won't
Yeah.
break it.
Yeah.
That's cool. And you just wipe your foot with a wipe. Now I'm going to have to
see.
make sure if it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And then
And
go
just pull on the sides a little bit.
stick your fingers all around the edge and just pop it off by the heel.
Yep.
Wow, Cinderella. When I got home, I took a pair of old shoes and I wrapped them in saran wrap, and I used the exact same procedure in order to create a plaster shoe at home without actually having to use my foot. And I'm going to show you right now me popping it out of the mold. And you see it just comes right out because the leather of the shoe flexes. And once you get it out of the mold, you can pull out the saran wrap, and then you have this beautiful sculpture of a shoe. And at that point, you can just crumple up tinfoil or use oak tag or cardboard or tape or even Crayola Model Magic or any sort of clay, and you can add to the sculpture and then go ahead and plaster over that to change the form. Like you could give it a high heel or make faces on it or birds coming out of it or hands coming out of it or any sort of thing to change the form or the shape. And then you would just paint the whole thing with gesso or modeling paste. And then you could just go back in with acrylic paint and start decorating it. This is what these 7th graders have made so far. And this is what my 6th graders have made so far. And they're going to be transforming them into the shoes of different people who were victims in the Holocaust, to try and bring those people back to life and show what they might have become had the lives of these children not been cut short. So each child was given an identity, and they read about the person, and it was most students were given the name of a child who died in the Holocaust, a little bit of information about that child, and they had to use their imagination to figure out what might have become of that child had their lives not been interrupted by war. And now they're going to design a shoe to give that child a personality and individuality, and show who that person would have been capable of becoming had their lives not been cut short. The name of the project is Soul Witness, and the idea is to transform those horrible anonymous piles of shoes of murdered Holocaust victims into shoes that express the individuality of actual Holocaust victims, so that that person's memory can be cherished and appreciated. This is day 2 of the project, and the students are starting to make their shoes. Let's visit our 6th graders. Oh, Angel. Okay, I'll be there in a minute, Angel. I'll be there in a minute, Angel. You see, you wrapped your foot in saran wrap, and now you're going to do the Paris thread.
So much work.
Look at that, Christina. Don't forget to smooth it out, or else it'll dry all lumpy.
I'm getting really frustrated.
Very smart to tape it. Good job, Haley. Just make sure you can slip your foot out when you're done.
Mine's so horrible.
You can fix it later. Just do your best. Remember, the woman in the video smoothed it, okay?
I'm smoothing mine, right? I'm smoothing mine.
Don't forget to smooth it.
Yes, I can. That's so cool. Oh, sorry, Louie.
Anything you make out of oak tag or tag board or any sort of paper product that could get soggy, you will have to cover it with tin foil before you start putting the Paris craft on it. Otherwise, it loses its form and starts collapsing. Here are some paper shoes that I made out of oak tag before I had to cover them with tin foil in order to put the Paris craft on them. And here is how I made them. Step 1, make sure both shoes fit on the cardboard disc. Then take one shoe off and trace the shoe that is left, leaving room for the other shoe. Then trace the second shoe so that you now have the outline of 2 footprints on the cardboard. Then you're going to cut them out. And then you're going to take the side of the shoe and you're going to place it like this on a piece of oak tag. You need to leave room in the back and room on the bottom. The room on the bottom is going to be divided into tabs, and you are going to cut it out, and you're going to fringe the tabs up to the bottom of the shoe, and then you're going to bend them. Once you've bent them, you're going to attach them to the cardboard using flat pieces of tape. You're going to need 2 identical pieces of oak tag, and you're going to attach them on both sides to the cardboard. So trace the first one before you tape it on to the shoe. Once you have both sides of the shoe, you're going to need to trace the bottoms of the shoes again, and this is going to be the top of the shoe and also the tongue of the shoe. So you tape that on, matching it up at the toes. And then you're going to cut it just like this, but save your scrap because that's going to be tucked underneath, and it's going to end up being the tongue of your shoe. And you see, tape it like this, and you stick it in there so it's taped in there to make the tongue of the shoe. How would an artist take a shoe and go about transforming it into a work of art? As it turns out, there are several prominent contemporary artists designing shoe sculptures. I'm going to show you some of them here. This is Robert Tabor's Soul Sensations. Sebastian Errázuriz, 12 Shoes for 12 Lovers series. As you look at these shoes, try and figure out what the artists were trying to express through their art. Obviously, they weren't thinking anything about the Holocaust, but each one of these artists had a purpose and tried to express different emotions or life experiences through these shoes. And that's something you can do with your artwork. Gwen Murphy, Foot Fetish. There's actually a website called the Virtual Shoe Museum, and you can actually go there and search out contemporary artists who are using shoes to create artwork or designing shoes from scratch to get inspiration. So you could go on the Holocaust website from the National Holocaust Museum, or even on Wikipedia, and there are lists of names of concentration camp victims and survivors. Usually they're separated by children, women, men. What we're going to have the children do is we're going to have them look up a survivor or a Holocaust victim and learn a little bit about them. For instance, this is my father's information from the website, explaining where he lived during the war, what concentration camp he was in, what ghetto he was confined in. Here's a photo of him from 1934. So I think it would be interesting to be able to take a pair of shoes, a sculpture of shoes that you made out of plaster, and transform them into a work of art, something that brings back to life a person who perished in the Holocaust or a person who suffered during the Holocaust, something to show who that person actually was, so they stop being this pile of anonymous shoes, just discarded and forgotten, and bring them back as individuals. How are they different from everybody else? And it could also be a good writing exercise for students. I specifically gave my students the identities of children who'd been in the Holocaust and asked what those children might have done with their lives had they had a chance to grow up. Could they have cured cancer? Could they have created beautiful artwork? Could they have written a magnificent novel? Give them the future that they were denied and use your imagination and be creative.